Our esteemed panelists, my co-moderator, Ms. Linda Riziki, ladies and gentlemen, may I welcome you to this virtual meeting organized to commemorate 10 years of the Constitution of Kenya. 10 years ago tomorrow, the country promulgated a new constitution dispensation, bringing to an end years of sustained clamor for constitutional change. The country had suffered years of abuse of power, human rights violations, systemic corruption, deteriorating civic and political environment, a failing democracy, patronized public institutions incapable of making independent decisions, economic marginalization, and tribalism. For the coastal people, the quest for a new constitution was driven by the need to address historical land injustices, economic marginalization, and widespread poverty. The new constitution ushered in a governance structure devolving resources to the counties, creating independent constitutional commissions, and producing a progressive Bill of Rights. It inculcated a set of values to guide its implementation, including national unity, the rule of law, good governance, integrity, public participation, human dignity, and sustainable development. As the country marks the 10th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution, we ask ourselves, what has changed? What, if anything, has changed? That the court and well-versed panel are ready to lead this discussion. My colleague will introduce them a little bit later. Meanwhile, I will call upon the Director Haki Yetu, Father Gabriel Dolan, and the Chair of the Coast Civil Society Reference Group, Zedekiah Adika, to make short remarks before I welcome my co-moderator to introduce the panel and lead the discussion. But before I do that, there are ways you, the participants, can participate in the discussion. You can post your remarks on our comments on the chat box below, or post your questions in the question and answer box. The panelists will interact with them and respond to them. We shall have a plenary session at the end where you will get an opportunity to share your remarks by raising your hand using the palm symbol at the bottom. Thank you. Father Gabriel Dolan, karibu sana.
Yes, good morning everybody. I'm very excited about today's event. 10 years since we inaugurated the new constitution in Kenya. And I'm just remembering that yesterday we had a peaceful demonstration in Mombasa to protest against the corruption involved in the COVID-19 funds. And it made me realize at the end of it what has changed when police are there to deny people peaceful assembly, and and to arrest people. They were charged in very bogus charges in court. And it said to me, what has really changed? The mentality of so many people of state institutions what has changed for the coastal people? And I thought, maybe it's even worse for the coastal people because more people were arrested in Mombasa than anywhere else. At least in Kisumu was this part of the handshake that people were allowed to protest peacefully. It made me wonder. So I'm excited that we've got a very strong panel who can answer all of those questions. We have a lot of experience as working in the formation of the Constitution. And Abubakar and Samia, who was in the executive in Lamu County until she resigned on an issue of integrity. And Senator Sarai from Mombasa, who's been out of the limelight for a couple of weeks. But we know that he'd come back recharged with more energy than ever. So welcome everybody. I don't want to take up your time. I don't have anything more to say, but it's wonderful. And all the participants, wherever you are, keep sending in those messages. And I hand you over to Adika, the chairman of the CSOs in Mombasa. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Father Dolan.
Thank you, Father, for the good introduction. My name is Zedekiah Adika. I work at Kituo cha Sheria as an advocate and a program officer. I'm here to introduce the Coast Civil Society Network. It's a network of organizations along the coast. We are around 5 of us. We are set in thematic areas. The thematic areas include land, security, we have governance, and then we have health and gender. We also have a youth component. We have a component that deals with persons with disability. And then we have 3 top leaders, who is the secretary represented by TI. And then we have the coordinator represented by Manyata, and ourselves, Kituo, that chairs the network. Now, today we are here to commemorate 10 years of the Constitution. And like Kazungu and Father has noted, there are challenges, huge, numerous challenges that the civil society has been trying to grapple with over the time. Our closest ally has been the judiciary in the state component. But we still have some of those challenges, including respect of court orders. What sort of political order do we have? Is it a political order that respects the rule of law, or is it a political order that disregards the rule of law? And to what extent is it? Is it that the one that completely contravenes what the Constitution wants, or the structures that the Constitution put in place for us, or is it one that respects those structures? I will give few examples where the civil society has been able to stand for the region and even the nation. One are issues around environmental cases. You saw what Sevlamu did in collaboration with the counterparts from Nationwide and even Mombasa. You also saw what we did with Owinohuru, where Haki Yetu and our colleagues from the ground worked so hard to ensure that there was a verdict that is pro-people. Apart from that, in the last few years, we grappled with issues around public participation and entrenching constitutionalism in our devolved system. But we still have obstacles, these obstacles that include the sort of political culture that we have. Assemblies do not have their voices in this region. Institutions are not put in place. For instance, 4 years down the line, Mombasa County has not put a very instrumental institution in place called the County Budget and Economic Forum. And as such, we are grappling with poor public participation just because that important institution is not there. But apart from those, what has, for instance, one of the biggest credits that we can take from the Constitution, what has it done to the coast? Devolved system ought to have translated to resources along the coast, like the Tsavo National Park being a resource for this region, the ocean, the Indian Ocean being a resource for this region. In areas like Marireni, where salt is being mined, that should have been wealth to this region. Is that what we are seeing? I will leave that to the panelists to share with us. I also want to say that civil society has grappled with a poor environment of operation, largely because even the legal structure, we have been denied implementation of PBO Act, which would have put us in a better place. We have seen a lot of frustrations from the state, including arrests like the ones that happened yesterday, and you wonder when a magistrate to this date, who sometimes may not have been paid because the money was stolen, still gives bond, such huge bond of 20,000 per person. So if they arrest 20 people, you have to look for 200,000 for things that will even help us. So how can we put people instead to see through? The other thing that the civil society is wondering, what is it with the police culture? People in this region continue to disappear. People are taken from their homes until last week. Mori, Haki Africa, and a lot of Uraia and a lot of civil society organizations in this region have been fighting so that the due process in arresting people is maintained. That is still a mirage. Those with a lot, what the civil society feels that we need to do is to continue with sensitization, that there's strength in the voice of Wananchi. And then as we grapple with issues internally and including funding, we are also trying to look at who are our allies, and can we count on those allies so that we carry the coastal area into the new dispensation that is foreseen by our constitution. I thank you. May we proceed, Kazungu.
Thank you. At this juncture, I would like to introduce my co-moderator, Madam Linda Riziki. She is the coast representative of the LSK Council, and she will take us through the next session. She will introduce the panelists and lead the next discussion. Karibu Riziki.
Thank you so much, Kazungu. Thank you to Haki Yetu. Thank you to all the CSOs involved today, and my esteemed mother branch, Mombasa Law Society, for this opportunity to moderate today's very important discussion. As been said by Kazungu, my name is Riziki Emokule. I'm an advocate of the High Court based in Malindi and the coast representative to the LSK. Now, today's topic is actually very, very crucial because we want to know, in 10 years that we've had a new constitution, are we there yet? Has there been a trickle-down effect? Do you feel the impact of a new constitution? Although it's not so new, but our able panelists today will be able to deal with the thematic titles that we've given each to tell us whether they feel the constitution has done what it was supposed to do so far, the advantages, disadvantages, pros, everything. Now, without further ado, we have 4 very prolific speakers for today. I'll introduce each of them. I'll start with my very own chairman of the Mombasa Law Society. That's Matthew Nyabena. Mr. Nyabena has been an advocate of 19 years standing. Wow, that's a long time. He's very passionate about the rule of law and access to justice. He's the chairman of the LSK Coast Branch in Mombasa Law Society. He's a church elder, committed Christian, and an advocate for access to justice for all litigants. He also likes participating in public interest cases and believes in using the law to squeeze out what is good for the general public. Thank you very much and welcome, Mr. Nyabena. Our second panelist is going to be Mr. Hassan Omar. Now, I don't think Mr. Hassan Omar needs any introduction, but nevertheless, I'll still read out his biography. Mr. Hassan Omar is the immediate former senator for Mombasa County. He has also previously served as a commissioner at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Commissioner Hassan is the founder and board member of both the Muslim Consultative Council, a human rights and constitutional change lobby group, and national coordinator of the Muungano wa Mageuzi, or Movement for Change lobby group, which advocated for the expansion of democratic space in Kenya in the period leading to the 2002 general election. He also served briefly in the Kenya Armed Forces. Wow, that's commendable. Was the Secretary General of the East Africa Youth Council, Kenya chapter. He's a committee member of the National Constitutional Education Facilitative Committee, and is also a former chairman of Moi University Students Organization, MUSO, and the Council for University Students of East Africa. At this point in time, I think it's only fair that I also mention I'm a proud alumni of Moi, and I was also in MUSO. So the senator is a comrade. Moving forward to Mr. Abubakar Zain, he's a distinguished governance consultant. He also happens to be a former member of the East African Legislative Assembly and a commissioner at the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. He has previously served as executive director for Uraia Trust. He also served as a member of the Kenya National Steering Committee of the New Partnership for Africa's Development, or NEPAD. Mr. Zain is also the team leader of the National Response Initiative, which responded to the national crisis after the 2007-08 post-election violence. Well in, Mr. Zain, karibu sana. Last but not least is our the only lady in the panel, Ms. Samia Omar. Ms. Samia is a consultant and environmental activist from Lamu County. She's a co-founder and a board member of Decolonize, a movement committed to stopping coal and coal-related industries for clean and sustainable energy in Kenya. The Decolonize campaign led to the suspension of the Kenya shillings 204 billion Lamu coal power plant in 2019. Ms. Samia deserves a clap for that in her committee. And previously, Ms. Samia also served as the county government of Lamu, in the county government of Lamu, as the county executive committee member for tourism, culture, and natural resources. That's in 2013 to the year 2016, before resigning in protest over the proposed coal power plant. Before joining the county government, she had served as executive committee member for Save Lamu. So there you have it, members. We have a very good panel today, and I'm hoping for a really candid discussion, a no holds barred discussion, so that we know whether the Constitution has done what it was meant to do so far. We have seen people being beaten up at the ferry for flouting COVID regulations. We have had innumerable assaults to justice in terms of land in the coast. I will not delve into that. I will let each panel member deal with their thematic title for today. And so far, I'll take it back to Mr. Kazungu. Welcome, Mr. Nyabena. Take us away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Linda, for that wonderful introduction to the panelists. At this juncture, I would like to welcome Mr. Matthew Nyabena to proceed. Mr. Nyabena.
Yes, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with the distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the room today to discuss about our constitution. I've been invited to speak about the rule of law, the gains made, and the threats that there are. First and foremost, I wish to state that we have the rule of law because we need to come together as human beings to have a set of rules which we can operate in, so that our own individuality or our own wishes are put together for the common benefit of the country or the citizens or all the people, so that we withdraw our own persuasions and join together to have some form of living that is comfortable to everybody else. So once we create this law, and the main law here is the backbone, that is our constitution, then we are able to define what to expect out of that constitution, what to expect out of the law, and to know our privileges, our rights, and our obligations under the constitution. So the rule of law, in this sense, means that we have to surrender our personal rights or what we could have done individually. If it's land, we know who is to get land. If it's cases, we know how the cases are going to be handled. And everybody then needs to respect the law if we have to have proper rule of law. Of course, the instance that we have is that those who are entrusted then, in terms of implementing the constitution and the laws, may either choose to be under the law or above the law. And that is a situation that we may seek to address today as we have this conversation, whether it's the constitution that has given us problems or is the people who are supposed to observe and guide in implementation of the constitution. So the constitution, you can have a very, very good constitution, but if Kenyans generally, you and I, do not change our DNA and know that we are all under the law and we ought to observe the law and we have the common good, then obviously we'll have a problem. I heard father saying that they were demonstrating, and it's quite interesting that yesterday when you demonstrate against those who have stolen, they are happy in their houses watching as you are being clobbered. So it's a question whether we have the proper rule of law in this country. And there are many institutions that we look at. We look at the institution of, the key player is the judiciary. Most of us, I come from where we interact mostly with the judiciary. There's the police, there's the Attorney General, there's the EACC, ODPP, NSIS, and the whole executive and legislature, whether we have lived in terms of what is required of us in observing the rule of law. This is an issue that we must interrogate very carefully as even we think about amending the constitution. I've had the conversations elsewhere, whether the problem is with the chair or the person sitting on the chair. So that if you make Hassan Omar the Commissioner of Police, if he is able to observe what is contained in the constitution, well and good. But if we get a Dika who is very aggressive with the use of power, then that becomes quite a challenge. So in terms of the gains that we made in the coast, and generally it may not be specifically because the rule of law is not tied to the coast. So if you have problems in Nairobi, if you have problems in Kisumu, they tie us up. So we have made commendable gains in terms of, we had police reforms, and I think we started very well. But you can see the clawback that has happened when we had the National Police Service Commission appointing and making appointments. There were attempts through Parliament to take this power to the executive, and you can see that this is now a challenge. National Police Service Commission is becoming a dummy of its own self. We have issues with EACC, which has also been challenged. We have our ethics, which is not being in a proper condition, but we celebrate some of these institutions. I wish to celebrate the ODPP. The ODPP has become a check on the DCI and the police. You remember the police could just arrest you, dash you to court, have you charged, but I like what our ODPP has done. He's been bold enough to point out that these charges are wrong and refuse to confirm those charges in court, and that is a step in the right direction, because we need a proper check on how these powers are being exercised. In terms of the judiciary, where we all walk to, and we know what the judiciary, initially, if you wanted to be, the judiciary was basically under the executive, and that is why you never saw much fight. If you wanted to be judge, you didn't apply, you just waited for a delegation to come from your village or from your county to State House and say, Riziki is a lady from our region, Mr. President, could you consider him being judged? But we now have a robust Judicial Service Commission where we make, where people make applications, and then there's public participation. If you have a problem with Nyabena was applied, you will state your problem, there are public interviews, and then there are appointments of judges. You remember also to mention that maybe the executive general is not happy with this. You remember them trying to sneak in an amendment that when you have appointment of the Chief Justice, then you require that 3 names be forwarded. So somebody wants to exercise some discretion, which Kenyans said, no, we entrust the Judicial Service Commission to make these decisions. Maybe to also say that the financial independence of KSC is a state of the judiciary is in the constitution. There is need to create the judiciary fund. Maybe that is also something that we have not gained. The judiciary fund has not been established. That is why you see the Chief Justice and the judiciary have been crying about starving of funds. You heard us as the Law Society come out to say that give the judiciary funds, and this is maybe something that needs to be followed, so that you know it doesn't become who pays the piper calls the tune, so that you go and deliver judgment, then your funding is restored or increased to that level. It's something that we need to look at so that the judiciary has financial independence. In terms of the region, we have seen the establishment of the Voi High Court. We have Garisen High Court. There is ongoing talks about having a High Court in Kwale, which is development in itself. We have more judicial officers who have been appointed. And this, as a region, the judiciary has done fairly well, but you know, Kiswahili wanasema mgema akisifiwa, tembo ulitia maji. So, but they need to do more. They need to do more to ensure that the rule of law is enforced. There are a number of decisions that have come out of the judiciary which are commendable, and there are some which we could obviously criticize in terms of upholding the law. Personally, I think where we lost it is when we had petition number 552, 554 of 2012. We had a very big question which the judiciary should have answered in my view, in a different way, when we had President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto running for office, and they were suspects of being charged in the EACC. I think eventually, because we set the threshold so low, nowadays you see anybody, any suspect, any person with a dark past can be able to run for office. So our integrity and Chapter 6 is at the very bottom. I don't think Kenyans aspired that we have people with issues in terms of governance to be able to lead them. I would also want to applaud the Honorable Ngugi who made a decision in Moses Kasaine governor's case. And that is why, to me, I say that I like somebody who squeezes out of the law something good. She held that governors who are charged with offenses may not go to the offices. And in so doing, initially, there was a lot of interference. So there's this movement from the judiciary, good decisions coming in, which are an improvement to the lives of Kenyans generally. We have the Supreme Court of Kenya. You remember 2013, the judgment by William Tunga, the 2017 judgment by the bench led by Honorable Maraga. I think it's a bold decision, which if it was taken well, it's only that we are political. If that decision was taken well and we had a repeat fair and free elections, we could be able to have moved forward. And I think it is a process that we must upload also the rule of law in terms that now we have constitutional petitions being done within 6 months. Initially, you could be in another election and you get a judgment on your election petition. So this is a step forward. I wish to challenge that possibly we could be talking about corruption cases being handled also within 6 months. You don't have somebody eating the money, building houses, and then you have a judgment that's coming 12 years down the line. So this is a challenge that we have to look at. There are more now ADR mechanisms that have been put in the constitution, alternative justice systems, which help in the manner that which we follow the rule of law. The police reforms, to me, we seem to be losing the police reforms, and we really need to ask tough questions as to where we are heading to. I've heard Adika mention about the disappearances of persons which are still there. The appointment of judges, you realize it's been in the news. We have 41 judges, and it's painful for me as a chair and as an individual that we have 41 judges who could have served each Kenyans from all corners of the country. Those judges have not been appointed. The president has for 1 year been saying that those judges are tainted. And he's the president of the country. Ideally we could expect him to have even these people investigated. If they are criminal offenses, they are taken to court. But sadly, all they can say that they are tainted issues. On my own part, the president has been initially the president in similar circumstances, appointed some judges to begin with, and then appointed the rest. He has not even appointed the clean ones. So if he has not appointed the clean ones, do we say that he's really trying to protect the law, or it's a question of revisiting? These are challenges that affect us in the manner in which we implement the law. And also on the part of JSC, it has done well, but to me I have a challenge in terms of discipline of judicial officers. Today if you write a complaint, you just write a letter. If you get an acknowledgement, there's no tracking system for us to follow on how those complaints are being dealt with. I'm aware some complaints have been there for 2 years. If somebody has complained about an incompetent judge, and then you have this process going on for 1-2 years, and Kenyans are suffering because of that incompetence. Maybe, and this is the problem. You saw recently some people took to Parliament a petition that there should be fresh vetting. So when people get frustrated with processes and feel that the processes are not going on well, then there are going to be such challenges. We need to open up. We need to relook at that issue of discipline of judges. We need to, in terms of EACC, look at what it's been able to do. I wish to state that in terms of our integrity, we have the Asset Recovery Agency. Asset Recovery Agency has done very well, because initially, we could wait for those 7 or 15 years for your case to be concluded before we can evaluate or follow your assets. But now, those assets are being frozen. Corrupt people are feeling the pinch of being corrupt, and maybe it's a step in the right direction. And to me, as I said earlier, it's a conversation that we need to have, whether within 6 months we can have these cases had and concluded. We don't need to be demonstrating. If we knew that in this COVID-19 billionaires, in 6 months, the evidence will be in court and everything will be concluded. And this is something I think all of us must be steadfast to follow so that we are able to go all the way. And in terms of another gain I wish to say is public interest litigation. We've seen many individuals and organizations, some of them represented here, going to court, going to tribunals to challenge some of the decisions that have been made and to ensure that governance is maintained to a level that is acceptable, and the courts have intervened and entertained that individuals, any person can now be able to bring in a suit in terms of any abuse of a right. Initially, under the old constitution, you had to show your nexus, and most cases were being dismissed because you could not show your interest in that case. But now we are moving to a system that ensures that we are in the proper platform, and we are moving forward to this system. Then there is the issue of our NSIS. Maybe this may not be constitutional, but we have seen some measure of militarization. We have seen some measure of militarization of our agencies. It's an issue that we need to look at. But overall, I wish to say we are well. We are thinking about amending or reviewing the constitution. But in my honest view, as I conclude, it's a question that we need to change the software of Kenyans. Let's think on how we approach issues. When we go to demonstrate about COVID-19 millionaires, you have hundreds and thousands of Kenyans watching 10 people demonstrating. We all need to get angry and demand that the constitution be implemented. At that point, I wish now to hand over to my brother Hassan Omar, who will give us views on the issue of devolution, which is at the center of what is in the Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my brother Nyabena Wakili. First and foremost is to appreciate the invitation by Father Gabriel Dolan. I remember when he was inviting me for this for discussion, I did tell him it was becoming a little too monotonous in the civil society movement in Mombasa and the coast region, that our only focus appeared to have been on matters of radicalization or for that matter, CVE, countering violent extremism. I think governance issues must remain at the core civil society movement, because the minute we slip up on matters governance, it is likely that it can create an extraordinary complacency on the part of government. In fact, as we said, it's quite ironic that almost 10 years after the promulgation of the Constitution, that we will find people still urging institutions of government, and particularly the investigative agencies, to undertake a complete and almost thorough and expeditious investigation, where there is reason to believe that key holders of power, family of the president, are complicit or participants in a scheme that defrauded this country, monies that should have gone towards the support of the COVID pandemic. Secondly, Riziki, I joined Moore University in 1995, and I immediately went into the movement for political change. That's almost 25 years ago today. It's ironic that what was our focus of activism, in terms of political activism, in terms of agitating for greater expansion of democratic space, democratic participation, is still again having moments that really almost 25 years down the line. And for me, I find it unacceptable that when we put in our effort almost 25 years ago to ensure that this country lives in a situation of greater democratization, this country has greater participation of its people, stronger democratic institutions, that we find a president who found a fairly flourishing nation, flourishing in its economics, flourishing in its governance, a progressive constitution, is trying to roll back that again so systematically to erode the powers of institutions to oversight, to return us back to an imperial presidency, to defeat the very purpose and objects of devolution, is something that is becoming extremely unacceptable to us as a country. As I talk about devolution, I think what we need to understand or take into consideration is what Article 174 of the Constitution, Chapter 11 that is, talks about when it comes to the objects of devolution. And I think devolution was expected to be an agency or a modus operandi by law for the enactment or enhancement of socioeconomic rights. That's why when you interpret the roles of devolved government under Part 4, Part 2, on the roles of the county government, you'll find that a lot of the socioeconomic rights, as envisaged in Article 43 of the Constitution, are actually functions of government, of county governments. That is the right to clean water, the right to housing, the right to healthcare, and I think there was a reason for that. They wanted the devolution to be a social movement in terms of enhancing the quality of lives of our people. We wanted to focus ourselves on human dignity, socioeconomic rights. We wanted to focus ourselves on social justice, on equity. But what happened is we elected a traditional core of governance within the Coast region and probably the whole of Kenya, apart from, I think, Professor Kibwana, who has been able to internalize devolution for what it means, who became lords and little kings within their own little enclaves of counties. And I think it became the devolution spirit and object was actually lost in that how we imagined and interpreted devolution in terms of how we started to program in terms of delivering to the people of Kenya. If you look at it very critically, governors started to focus on competing with mandates of national governments. They tried to think that their mandates were just about roads and infrastructure, because you see, our development agenda, if you look at closely at what national government does, is more about grandeur and vanity. We are meant to believe that when your city looks white and blue, then the governor has delivered, rather than whether there's bread and butter or food on the tables of our people. We were meant to believe that if I build you a road, notwithstanding whether that road has impacted on the lives of our people, then that is what we have delivered. If you look at today, for instance, what Uhuru Kenyatta tries to position as his legacy, he gives you railways and roads and bridges that he has built, yet they have had a very little impact on the economy or the lives of the people. So I think building a road or building a bridge is not rocket science, but building lives is what devolution had intended to achieve. So therefore, if you transpose that to Article 10 of the Constitution, particularly sub-Article 2, where Kenya was literally molded into, if you look at the issues in terms of national values and principles, human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusivity, equality, human rights, non-discrimination, and protection of the marginalized. Kenya was literally positioning its ideological standpoint as literally a social democracy that tries to ensure that every Kenyan is given a dignified life, every Kenyan is given capacity into his life and to make life more meaningful. All these systems were eroded quite substantially. Values or concepts of our public finance and transposed into county government's development programs. And we saw a mad rush by governors trying to compete on who brings a road over priorities of that county. There were the participation of the people. That was the intention of devolution, is that within the objects was to bring government and decision making closer to the people. That was fairly defeated. A lot of things that we see today go against the grain of what devolution was about. For instance, if you look at Mombasa, it was never intended that a government would become a developer in its own right. A government was to be a facilitator, to provide housing to the most vulnerable of within the tiers of our society, the elderly, people who are disenfranchised economically, the lower income cadres, and where then the government thinks that putting up skyscrapers is a unit of development is exactly the issues I'm talking about, where there was a misconceptualization of devolution, where people thought grandeur and vanity was what defines devolution or development. I look at Professor Kibwana. He put meaning into the lives of his people. He tried to mobilize them socioeconomically. He tried to do simple things that had a very massive impact, value addition, processing, and things of that nature that then gave the farmer who grew his mangoes the ability to go and take them for processing into juice, where there is value addition and then sold at a higher price, therefore improving the quality of lives of the people of Makueni County. So for us who have been in the coast region, the challenge has been what have been the focus of our governance. I remember when I was talking to the UNDP program when I was senator about Hadi. I think there's a program under UNDP called Hadi to strengthen devolution. I remember I was being told various counties around the country were asking for various programs. Some wanted performance-based models. Others wanted various areas of IT development. Mombasa County asked for communication. That's why we saw big billboards everywhere, which was trying to show the performance of the governor. So there was more vanity rather than reality. So I think what we need to do is maybe to refocus. We have an opportunity 10 years down the line to refocus on how we need to internalize the whole aspect of devolution and reposition devolved governments and the functions and priorities of devolved governments. Finally, if I were to do a scorecard, and a very objective scorecard of what devolution has been for the people of Coast Rica, one would not see any real impact in terms of economic development apart from having ourselves some glorified government has been or glorified district commissioners or glorified mayors who simply were running the across these counties, empowering friends, empowering families, building crossing, importing the bad values of national government back into county governments. And I think also where we went wrong was we did not bring enough social justice practitioners and constitutional practitioners to more accurately interpret the spirit and letter of revolution and analyze it in government policy and program. On the BBI and constitutional BBI, I strongly believe Kenya is not in any constitutional moment. The constitutional moment President Kenyatta talked about is only in his own head. The problem is that he failed the constitutional process, then says that the constitution is the problem. I think, therefore, the only moment that is there for President Kenyatta is to start packing to leave. I'm told he's up to a legacy, but I think more than a legacy, we have lessons to learn of what presidents must not do. Presidents must not play around with the times they're given by their people. They must not entrench personal interest over state, over the well-being of state. They must not, build chronism. They must not build, patronage over certain extract that is so pervasive to the well-being and the survival of the state. So for me, I think it is not a moment to change the constitution. It's not a constitutional moment. It is a moment for us to see how best we can get practitioners in the coming elections who can internalize and be able to implement for us the Constitution. It's about constitutional implementation rather than constitutional change. So therefore, I see that the people have positions about managing transition politics. It's about succession politics. It's about creating more jobs and opportunities for people who fail to make it to presidency. See, I was once talking to a friend, to be more precise. I was talking to Boniface Wange. I was telling him the whole idea of this BBI is to entrench ethnic chiefdoms within the structure of state or government. Whereas Kalonzo Musyoka was initially, or for that matter, Musalia Mudavadi or Raila Odinga, operate from their private office. You want to tell them the minute we bring in BBI, we will be able to allocate you a certain office, and by that extension, entrench ethnicity within the structure of our government. I think it is the time now for Kenyans to really look back and forth and look critically to ensure that we are able to internalize a constitutional based on what the whole world, upon promulgation 10 years ago, yet tomorrow, that Kenya had one of the most progressive institutions in the world, with one of the most progressive Bill of Rights in the world. The people who are retrogressive are those who are managing our security structures, Matiangi, IG, and his ilk. The people who are not progressive are the people who are managing the entire, who are duty bearers within the whole framework of the Constitution. So for you to fail the Constitution and then turn back to us and tell us it is a constitutional moment so that you can take us back to the draconian days, I think is a bit of an unfortunate occurrence in this modern era. And lastly, is the CRA, the Commission, the revenue. I have to mention that briefly because I think devolution was just not about political devolution, where we have governors who maraud around our counties. Devolution was also, by and large, about economic devolution, where we were to ensure that very basic principles of government were enshrined: social justice, equity, protection of the marginalized. And based on all that, it means, therefore, we need to have an asymmetry in how we share our national resources, to tell us, oh, sisi ni watu wengi, wapatiwe watu wengi, and to look at a president who does not appreciate the values of the Constitution and tries to incessantly look at our exit is one of the most low moments for this country. As a president, as duty bearers in this country, we have a responsibility to ensure that devolution is not about putting an extra tier of government, county assemblies, upon our people. Devolution must be about also devolution of resources in a manner that is useful. So I think I was told that we should take about 15 minutes. I'll end there. I just want to give the purview of my 15 minutes. We have unfortunately, when you get into the political space, you lose the discipline of time. And I want to make sure that I still live to that discipline of time. So I'll wait for the feedback and engage in the discussion. Looking forward. Now I will want to invite a dear sister, one who makes me very proud in this country and in this region, who I have seen her principles have been almost unshakable. And I hope one day in the country's and the coast region's development, quite a very top activist in the coast region and in Lamu. We know her role that she has played in the coal industry in terms of stopping the poison that was to consume Lamu. We want to invite my dear sister Sami Omar, but the Omar has no connection to our fathers.
Pleasure and thank you so much for the organizers for such an opportunity. I think it's a very exciting time to reflect now based on the circumstances of what's going on. We're all undergoing a reprioritization of after COVID, and everything seems so irrelevant what we're going through. So it's good to reflect realistically, and I think so for all of us, and it's been said by speakers earlier, the Constitution was seen as an opportunity to transform the lives of all Kenyans, but in particular of minorities, marginalized, and special interest groups, especially women. And there was a lot of pinned hopes. And while we've had some form of establishment of key institutions and programs that are aimed at promoting more equality or the interests of women and marginalized groups, but looking at actually gender mainstreaming, looking at the fiscal policies and budgetary decisions and actual sustainable policy that has been developed related to these issues, it's not that much. So you have the fanfare of the the affirmative action social development fund that's given to women reps, and the fanfare of the equity or seeking for equity that we've seen with the devolution funds, and how the assumption is if money goes to the developed governments, then automatically minority groups are catered for. But minority groups go beyond just the counties. You have minority groups in Nairobi, you have minority groups, marginalized groups in Mombasa, you have marginalized groups in Kisumu. So every county has their aspect and share of marginalized groups. So, and it cannot be presumed that just with the affecting of the Constitution, then it's a trickle down domino effect. In particular, in relation to the women, and actually into the women and the marginalized interests, I think the aspect that captures it the most is just the fact that the women and marginalized groups are mentioned as part of the national values. They're mentioned as the Bill of Rights, part of the Bill of Rights, explicitly and consistently throughout the Constitution. What was their actions to the words? And I think as a woman, I think for me that although that stands out the most in the media is leadership, but we tend to overlook the minor gains that we've had on property rights and the minor gains that we've had on citizenship. And many Kenyans, for those who haven't tried to seek through the citizenship process, were not aware that for a long time, actually, a woman had no right to citizenship. That if your mother was a Kenyan and your father was a non-Kenyan, then you actually had a harder time gaining citizenship. And so much more is focused on the women representatives and what they presented as, and the 1/3 rule, that we neglect the small changes that, such as property rights. There are a lot of traditional laws that previously actually had rights over, determined the rights of women over land, and many women couldn't inherit property and had actually barriers to accessing the judiciary process in order to gain their property rights. So that is often forgotten, but is actually significant to the common mwananchi and to the ordinary person who might not be as aware on the policy and programmatic level of devolution. And unfortunately, though, is even with the ones that have made within the media that we're aware of, for example, with the aspect with Article 97 and recognizing that the 47 women representatives, but yet now you have even the interpretation of who these women representatives are. It's presumption where when you mongozi wa wanawake, you are the leader of women and not a leader in your own rights. And it's now been misinterpreted in a way that they are different from other members of parliament, but actually they serve the same function. The only thing is they have an additional role to other members of parliament to specifically focus on how these policies or budgetary considerations would impact women. And so they have an extra step to take beyond the member of parliament. And although many of the lobbying around the women representatives was around, well, can they have equal access to funds like the CDF so that they can also effect grassroots changes? The presumption that they cannot be any grassroots changes if there's no funds associated to it. And that lobbying led to the installation of the Affirmative Action Social Development Fund, where it's very similar to CDF, although not as big and not as grand, and many have complained for that. But when you actually dissect it, that in itself is not constitutional. The CDF in itself is not constitutional, because if we're talking about separation of powers, that there's the executive versus the legislators, then actually the women rep and the MPs should not be, as well as members of the county assembly, should not actually be put in charge of managing any funds. Otherwise, it takes away the roles of the county government and the roles of the devolved functions. However, we focus more on the funds rather than look at what policy, what have they debated to change for the ordinary woman. Yes, right now, for example, we have rights to maternity leaves, something simple like that. We have now rights to property, but what other rights can be enshrined in our laws that these women representatives can lobby for, rather than denigrate their roles to managing this small fund in their respective counties. And when we actually look further into that and how this relates to women on the grassroots, even those funds themselves, or even devolution itself that was intended to benefit these women, can they actually participate in these activities or these programs that have been launched? There's so many entrepreneurial activities or funds that are supposed to encourage financial independence of women, and these are managed either by the women reps, by the county governments, or by the national government, and presumed to have been inspired by the Constitution. But when you actually look at it, there's the majority of, if you look at the literacy levels, if you look at access to technology, if you look at speaking English, actually in proportionality, more women are likely not to be as highly educated as men, not to speak as English as much, and not to have access to technology. Yet these grants, these opportunities are announced online, they're announced in English, you're told to go to our website and apply. So even the implementation of these programs that are expected to realize the rights enshrined in the Constitution are not properly implemented. And when you now consider the women as a marginalized group, it exacerbates it further. So if you're a woman coming from a marginalized group, it becomes tenfold. And when we say marginalized, I think using the definition of the Constitution, talking about communities that have been on the fringes of nationhood and been on the fringes of being recognized either as having equal rights to other Kenyans, we can go into so much more detail if we're going to look beyond tribes and look at also disability and including the elderly. If you consider marginalized as beyond what you think of somebody of a different ethnicity, then no, this definitely has not been enough. Just the fact that within the Constitution, public participation is enshrined, that you have to have public participation for the bills, you have to have public participation for your projects. The county integrated development plan, which is the most devolved planning structure that came out through the establishment of the Constitution, has to have a lot of public participation. However, how is it really carried out? You have this meeting that's carried out in English or Swahili in most of these locations, in town centers where many of these marginalized groups cannot commute to, or at times where women actually cannot attend to, especially women in rural communities. And so while the essence of the Constitution, the essence of the equality has definitely, it sounds good on paper, I don't believe that we are actually living to the Constitution as it should be. And I think one of the strongest parts of the Constitution is that it recognizes not just what your rights are now, but that historically you could have missed out on those rights, so you have a right to catch up. And that's through affirmative action, affirmative action programs. And these are specifically targeted in Section 56, specifically targeted for minorities and marginalized groups. Including 4 sectors on governance, on educational and economic opportunities, on access to employment and cultural values, and access to health, water, and other service infrastructure. So those 5 areas, 5 areas that specifically the government has said, we have a right to have affirmative action to help those who are left behind catch up. I mean, that simply put, it summarizes what the TJRC report was about. It summarizes what the Equalization Fund is about. But now when you actually look at what's been happening the last couple of weeks, where there's actually people who are in their right state of mind are debating the Equalization Fund and how it is distributed and who it's distributed to. There's a debate on this Commission of Revenue Allocation and the formula, how those 14 counties are identified, and it makes you wonder, really, have we rewound back time? Are we still in 2010 that we're having these discussions? We had already a referendum on this, yet we're having these discussions today. And even when you look at the Commission of Revenue Allocation, and so proudly seeing that the senators, the Kenya team stood by, is understanding that sometimes to have equity, you have to have inequality. And we cannot make equity the same thing as being equal. for me to catch up to the last 50 years or as a woman to the last existence of the race, of the human race, there has to be some level of inequality. I would have to have more access to funds. I would have to have more access to opportunities of education and employment. I would have to have stipulated positions in government, but not taking it to the step where one right to me takes away from another. It is definitely a balance, but when you have it that we are in effect creating division between the marginalized communities and the communities that have benefited more from independence in the last 50 plus years, then we're heading towards the wrong direction, and we're actually reversing the gains of the Constitution. And especially even when you look at the implementation of it, even if you have these funds and you have these policies that define how the funds should be implemented, like the Commission of Revenue Allocation, when you actually go and dissect it and you look at another enshrined right to affirmative action is on employment. Who sits on the actual staff, majority of staff? Who are the most employed? Which communities, which counties do the people in these senior government offices sit? Which counties do they come from? So it doesn't just come to having a superficial monetary benefit. And even that 0.5% that is supposed to benefit the equalization fund, how much of it is stolen, and how much of it actually gets to the hands of these marginalized groups that are trying to be supported by this fund. And we have to be realistic that you have to give some in order to get some. And so even as marginalized communities that have benefited from historically, let's say, for example, me coming from Lamu and having had the opportunity to get educated, having had the opportunity to live outside Lamu, and I'm now in a situation where I can benefit the community. Do I then use my role to say, well, this is for me as a woman to help, or is this for me as a minority group? And so we've had many debates where most of the people who are in senior states of power who forget that somehow if the marginalized communities and the women are not helped to lift it up, then as a nation we will not be lifted up. And I think going forward, I think my time is almost up. Going forward, we have to use this opportunity, the Constitution, as an opportunity, one, to start conversations. And I think reflecting on the good and the bad and getting rid of the bad. And we have to also not simplify Kenya into two parts, where there's the marginalized versus the non-marginalized. It's much more complex than that, because even within those, and I gave my example, within those who are marginalized, there are those of us who are not as marginalized. So we should recognize also our internal roles within the counties. So even as we elect governors or we elect MCAs and women representatives, are those actually within our counties reflecting the needs of the marginalized groups within those counties? And not necessarily so, because achieving these positions is related to access to money, related to access to power and connections that some might have inherited as a result of their historical access to opportunities in education. And I think another aspect, the last aspect, is on oversight. And as much as the women representatives and these marginalized community representatives are in the county assemblies or in the National Assembly who sit there, these nominated representatives in these assemblies, what is the oversight role and how can that be enshrined in policy? And I think even when we take a step further looking at the institutions that have been set up, like the National Land Commission, beyond the assemblies, and the institutions that are supposed to uphold some of these values of the Constitution, are they truly having oversight over these issues? And they actually, or are they siding with the executive or siding with the status quo? And to use one particular example is, one of the ways to help realize the rights of marginalized communities is through land reforms, where most of them, what we call marginalized groups, in Isiolo, Garissa, Lamu, Mandera, and all the northern frontier counties, the lands were previously known as trust lands or the crown lands. And therefore, local communities were considered as squatters in their lands. And so the constitution, by converting the land into public land, the idea was for the devolved governments, devolved units, to now have access to the land and use it for the interests of the communities. And the land was supposed to be managed essentially by the county governments on behalf of the communities. But then you use an example like, let's say, Lamu, where I'm from, and an example like Lapset and the Lamu coal plant, because I'm really familiar with that, I could speak more clearly on that example, is you've had hundreds of thousands of acres of land that have been gazetted as Lapset land, which is a government entity. But what is the National Land Commission doing about it? What are they speaking about it? What are the rights of the community? So all of a sudden, within the strike of a pen, you have hundreds of thousands of people that have been told, this is not your land, this belongs to Lapset. And this is the same law that was supposed, the constitution was supposed to help give this land back to these marginalized groups, help give it back to the counties to manage on behalf of these marginalized groups. But yet, I wouldn't like to call them toothless dogs, but we have a lot of toothless dogs. A lot of institutions that have been set up on paper to help prosper the constitution, but actually in effect do not call out the state and do not call out the executive when needed against the infringement of rights on marginalized groups and women. And so to repeat and in conclusion, I think we definitely have to remember that to attain equity in Kenya, we have to have some inequality, and that is relinquishing some of our personal rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Samia. Thank you for that profound presentation. And now to our last presenter, Abubakar Zain.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank
you. I'm so sorry, I forgot. I was supposed to introduce
you. All right, Samia, it's okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and also thank the distinguished speakers who spoke before me. I've been asked to speak on the subject matter, BBI, liberation of fraud. So in addressing this subject matter, I would like to go a roundabout way and then have an agreement with the participants that they will make a decision at the end if it is liberation of fraud. Allow me not to answer that at the beginning. Let's do it at the end. So the first point I'd like to make is that this is a very broad subject matter, and it's very difficult to speak about it comprehensively in 15 minutes. But I will try to just highlight the principles of some of the things that we need to bear in mind when we are having a conversation concerning any possibility of amending the constitution at this point in time, in the context that we are now reflecting 10 years after the adoption of the 2010 constitution. So the first idea I would like to share with you is an idea that was articulated by the late Okoth Ogendo. Professor Okoth Ogendo, who was involved in the constitution making process and was one of the vice chairs of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, but also the Rapporteur General at the National Constitutional Conference, popularly known as BOMAS, articulated that the problem of Africa is not that Africa or African countries is lacking in having constitutions, but the lack of constitutionalism. In other words, the challenge for African countries and African governments is to abide and respect the letter and the spirit of the constitution and the rule of law. So that's where we need to start with. And to demonstrate that point, I will put forward this theory that every time an African executive or leaders of government have been involved in initiating constitutional reform, they've actually taken rights from the people. They've actually shrunk democratic space. They've actually impinged on human rights. Think about it. From Independence Day, every time the executive, particularly of the nature of an imperial presidency or a strong executive authority, it has always led to authoritarianism. Every time there's been proposals that an executive leads in constitution-making processes, it has left the people in a worse off position than they were before the introduction of such reforms. And Kenya is not difficult to understand this. If you're a Kenyan, it's not difficult for you to understand this. Because if you think about all that changes we've had, when we adopted the 1963 Constitution, which was a negotiated democratic instrument, immediately politicians led by the Prime Minister then, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, got themselves into the business of reforming the Constitution. It led to dictatorship. It led to the dismantling of the 1963 Constitution, taking away the infrastructure that is supposed to provide a democratic practice, take away institutions of governance, and consolidating power in one institution. And fairly early in our lives as an independent nation, we then went into the process of authoritarianism that culminated into single-party dictatorship. Each and every amendment that was introduced in 1963 up to 1991 was self-serving to politicians and took rights away from the people and made Kenya a single-party dictatorship. It's only if you fast forward and you go to 1991, again based on the agitations of the people, demonstrations by the people, we must always go back to history and remember that changes that benefit the people come at a very high cost. There are very many men and women, heroes, who stood up to confront single-party dictatorship and to agitate for the reintroduction of multipartyism in Kenya. And when that was done in 1991, to open up slightly the democratic space, the executive also sneaked something small that benefited the executive. After 19 years of dictatorship, President Moi, the late President Moi, then argued and said, since 1992 now we have introduced this amendment, which had only limited implications in terms of constitutional reform, it only reintroduced multipartyism and put term limits for the president. President Moi argued that since term limits was a new innovation, then his term will not count, the 19 years will not count in the counting of the terms. And he said, now my term will begin. So he could run and rig the elections again in 1992 and did the same in 1997. And you'll also recall that through agitation of the people, we realized that removing Section 2A was not adequate enough for us to move towards a democratic constitution. So we, again in 1997, people agitated for more reforms. And you'll recall that people were talking about no reforms, no elections. Again, we had limited amendments. Again, the elections in 97 were rigged. So Moi went, and when we now had a big debate was, should we have a people-driven process or an elite-led process? So again, the people insisted that we must have a people driven, people-focused, people-centered process because the people are sovereign. And in 2002, he almost hoodwinked people again to amend the constitution piecemeal so that he could run again in 2002. And people said, no, we are not going to give him one single more day in office. Let's carry out the elections and then let's go back to Bomas, because they were undermining the proper functioning of the Constitutional Conference. So what are the lessons here? I'm trying to demonstrate that every time the executive leads a process, it leads to taking away rights from the people. And every time the people agitate and lead a process, it leads to people gaining rights. So what does this mean? We can talk about facts and figures, and we can demonstrate with evidence that process is as important as outcome. And a bad process will lead to a bad outcome. And an undemocratic process cannot lead to democratic outcomes. So look at this BBI and compare it with the democratic process that led to giving birth of the 2010 Constitution. The BBI process is an elite-led by only two people, the president and the former prime minister. It is not based on a law that is comprehensive and answers issues of process. It is only based on the powers of the president to appoint a task force. We rejected that with Moi. Why are people accepting that now? A task force that is answerable to the executive. And look at the task force and its secretariat. What kind of people have been appointed there? In the constitution making process, the appointment of those who will lead the review process was consultative and inclusive. You want to talk about that we want to attain more inclusion, but the process of appointing the task force is not inclusive. It's not participatory. But the two joint secretaries of the BBI, one is a serving member of the security agencies in Kenya. He's a senior member of the National Intelligence Service. He's also the head of the Anti-Terror Center. And therefore, he's a serving member of the security agencies. And by virtue of that, he suffers from an inherent conflict of interest. If his boss, who is the executive, the president, gave him an order and say, include this in the outcome, exclude this, what do you think would happen? The other joint secretary is a legal advisor to the former prime minister, has the same conflict of interest. So in the making of the instrument and the process, let me give you 3 or 4 examples where the BBI process falls way below the process that gave birth to the 2010 Constitution. We had a specific law that established specific values, that established each and every step of the review process, including civic education and civic engagement, but also including the provision that the outcome of the process shall faithfully reflect the views of and wishes of Kenyans. In other words, we had a set of values and principles that guided the review process that were justiciable. In the language of lawyers, know that when you say justiciable, it means if the values are not followed, or the steps are not followed, or that the process does not have accountability and transparency, you could go to court and question it. The current BBI framework does not have that process. That process also had clear mechanisms of how you use public resources for the review process. No one knows how the resources given to BBI have been sought, allocated, and being utilized. But let me give you what is the problem. And if you listen keenly to the articulation of the distinguished panelists who spoke before me, they identified certain important imperatives in terms of the reflections of where are we at 10 years down the line. The first one and the most important is that the problem of the constitution is lack of political will to implement the constitution with fidelity. It was consistent. It's a consistent theme that ran through all those who presented before me, and I affirm it. I believe in it. Those in authority have refused to implement this constitution with fidelity. So let's give a few examples. I'm just reminding people of some of the examples that have already been articulated before me. For example, the requirement that all appointive and elective positions shall not have more than 2/3 of the same gender representation. We have a cabinet appointed by the president that does not respect that constitutional principle. We have a court ruling saying that cabinet as constituted in the first 5 years of the current president and currently does not respect that principle. Therefore, that cabinet is unconstitutional. Now, you are saying to me, people who can violate the constitution with impunity are the ones you should trust to lead the review of the same constitution. Let me give you a second example. And somebody in the chat has already pointed this out, that as currently constituted, Kenyan Parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate, fail this cardinal principle that has been established by the Constitution. It does not have the principle of not more than 2/3 of the same gender being represented. Therefore, the current constitution of Parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate, is unconstitutional. And the court, at the highest level, the court of Kenya, has affirmed this position and gave Parliament an opportunity to ratify that. 10 years down the line, they have not been able to ratify that. And the solution is in the Constitution, and the President of the Supreme Court, who is also the Chief Justice and the Chair and the President of the Judicial Service Commission, has been given an opportunity to declare this unconstitutional and dissolve it. He doesn't need anything else, just dissolve it. Why that hasn't happened, no one can tell you. Let me go to the third one. And the distinguished chair of LSK Mombasa said there has been serial disregard of court orders. People who have been sworn into office, in other words, you cannot assume office unless you swear to uphold the Constitution, to respect the Constitution, and to defend that Constitution, have ignored court orders with impunity. Completely ignored court orders. Now you're telling me these are the people who should be entrusted with the stewardship of amending this Constitution. What do you think will happen? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know what will happen. Yes, you're saying, brother?
Time.
Okay, so can I make 3 little comments and
Sure.
stop there? The first one is that the timing of discussions about BBI is completely wrong. Kenya is paying a very high cost under the COVID-19 pandemic. There are Kenyans who do not have any work, livelihoods have been destroyed, our lives have completely been changed. Are you saying to me, under this context, there are still people who are thinking about the necessity of amending the Constitution and setting aside billions of dollars or billions of shillings to a political process that will violate every principle of managing this pandemic, including social distancing? The police were saying yesterday that they are arresting people because they are not social distancing. But BBI people are free to do whatever they want to do. The second one is that we have a crisis of an electoral management body that does not have the confidence of Kenyans and lack complete lack of trust and legitimacy. But you are saying this is the same people who even lack the simple quorum of making decisions that they can oversee a referendum. And then the third and the most important, I think, we were told that the BBI is a process of uniting this country. And it's an open secret, and every Kenyan knows that it is not doing that, but it is dividing the people. It is dividing the people to the extent that people are returning the evil sessional paper number 10 that led to marginalization of many communities and many parts of this country back through this so-called new formula for sharing resources. And you're saying, really, you're saying that now you can be entrusted to come out with a good outcome. So in summary, and my parting shot would be this: people who have violated the constitution with impunity, people who have refused to implement this constitution with fidelity, people who do not believe in constitutionalism and have reintroduced authoritarian rule in Kenya, are also saying we should trust them with shepherding and stewardship for constitutional reform. Only one thing that I want to leave in the minds of those who are participating in this discussion. Every time you have amended, even in a little way, the governance structures, those in power say we are not bound by term limits. So if you tamper with any form of governance structure, the president will say, I'm not bound by any term limits. And the governors will say, we are not bound by any term limits. So we can run again for any position that we want. And I hope in future we will have a longer time to discuss some of these things about BBI. And you can make up your own mind after this presentation if BBI is liberation or fraud. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Abubakar. That was very, very informative. Thank you to all the panelists for your very informative and educative contribution to this discussion. At this juncture, I would like to, I can see most of the questions that have been asked have in one way or the other received answers, but I'd still want to open up the session to anybody else who would like to make remarks or comments. You can either put that into the text box, the question box, or the chat box, or you can raise up your hand and I'll give you an opportunity to ask your question verbally. As we wait for that, I would like to recognize the presence of Uraia Trust, who have played a big role in organizing this particular session. Abubakar Said is present with us and would like to make a few comments. Karibu sana Abubakar. Abubakar.
Thank you very much, Kazungu. And yes, yeah. So yeah, this is a very important meeting and very insightful comments from the presenters. At Uraia, we are happy that these discussions are ongoing, and for us really is to observe and ask ourselves from these discussions, where do we go from here? And I like the fact that the former Senator Sanomar has mentioned that we need to go beyond CVE. I mean, yeah, CV is there, but I mean, is that what defines the coastal people? We have a lot of issues which affect us. And as Uraia, we'd like really to delve into the issues of governance also, because this is where the bread and butter is. Specifically, if you look at the tangent which Abubakar Zain has picked on the BBI, these are the discussions which we're going to engage in going forward. So as Uraia, what we're saying is that we are watching keenly, and we'd like to continue with these conversations. So from here, I'll just be watching in terms of what are the next steps forward? And then from there, we pick it up. But what we've done is we've lined up a series of conversations about the BBI and the referendum. And lastly is part of this series that you're having now, our way of celebrating Uraia Trust existence for the past 10 years. And so this is just part of picking it up. And we hope that this conversation will continue, because the mega festival for Uraia 10 will be in December. So we will consolidate all these conversations and look at the place of civil society in shaping the landscape of governance in Kenya. So I'll stop there as I keep on listening. Thank you, people.
Thank you very much, Abubakar. So as we wait for further comments and reactions from listeners, I would just want to give an opportunity to our panelists to react to some of the questions. Most of the questions that have been raised or remarks are basically in agreement to what the panelists have been discussing. And I do not think there's one that really requires an answer. The first question was from Mbula Mtula, and it was directed to Senator Hassan Omar. And I think Senator has addressed all the questions that were there in his comments, including his take on the stalemate on revenue sharing and all that. The rest are basically agreements with what the panelists have been discussing. So I would want to give just a minute to each of the panelists to just give their way forward and their closing remarks in relation to the discussion that we've had today. And then I'll give an opportunity to Father Gabriel Dolan to give closing remarks and to summarize all that we've heard today and to close this session, as we had only we had planned for 2 hours and we are coming to the end of the 2 hours, so we do not want to go beyond that. So I'll go back to Senior Matthew Nyabena to just give him an opportunity to give his closing remarks and a way forward after listening to the other panelists. Nyabena. Kindly unmute your microphone.
I've seen an issue about court orders. My position is that court orders must be obeyed. Courts must be bold. They must make decisions. Today you are in power. I remember there's a time Kalonzo ran to court to try and see if we can clean some file. It will come to haunt you one day. You are never in power the whole day. On the issue of BBI and whether Kenyans have something they can do, I can say without fear of doubt that we have the power in our hands. We have the power to decide. Let's stay firm. If BBI comes, and I think the panelists have said basically there is nothing much to change other than maybe the software of our leadership. Maybe it's a high time we will, if they push it to a referendum, we have the power in our hands and we'll obviously decide. So let's not fear. For those of us who are ready and speaking about the ills and the problems that are there, let's continue speaking. I like taking the example the late Wangari Maathai gave about the hummingbird. The hummingbird may be alone. You may be alone shouting, but at least you will be doing what you are supposed to do. So let's keep on this pace. And in terms of what is happening within Mombasa and elsewhere, I think let Mombasa be seen as an icon of these issues and the challenges that we face, brothers and sisters, we must solve them as the residents of Mombasa. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Nyabena. Senator Hassan Omar.
I want to specifically direct myself to one comment that was made by Alice Katunda, asking whether an activist can become a politician. A debatable question. Yeah? Remember, one of the things that inspired some of us to join politics is not for the love of politics, but for the appreciation that your ideas count for nothing if they are not backed by measurable influence, political influence or political power. I remember what Barack Obama said when he was launching his bid for the presidency of the United States. They said ideas just remain that, ideas, if they have no measurable political power and will to implement them. So I think it's high time, us as people who have regarded ourselves as activists in the civil space, to stop just urging the IG to stop his excesses. The IG does not have to be a member from the disciplined forces or a member of the police service. An IG can be an ordinary citizen. So next time we want to see Father Dolan as the Inspector General so that he can be now inculcating and institutionalizing these transformative values within what democratic policing is all about, and the deconstruction of the regime police to a democratic policing service, and moving our democracy from secularization to more of participation. So I think activists have to answer that critical question. The political what is it called? The political turf is very murky, it's very muddy, it's very difficult, and most of the times activists sit in this moral high ground and critique everybody else for lacking in sincerity. So you who is sincere, then come up and do something, because the country is really degenerating at a level that is appalling. Secondly, I think activists in civil society need to consider whether there is an opportunity to create a broad-based platform. Where we are in Kenya right now, you should stop being this Puritan or this moralistic person and start to muddy your hands to ensure transformation in this country. We cannot continue to sit in our comfort zones where we just act as auditors of governance, but rather than being real participants of good government. So therefore, let's look at the possibility of building. I saw when Martha Karua, John Githongo, David D, and a couple of others, a litany of activists were at Limuru for the Saba Saba. There was an appreciation that we must now play high politics. We must now be able to merge our efforts, to merge our capacities, and to transform this into government. And to finally end that conversation with Alice. Alice, I think if you want a good Chief Justice, like Willie, I think, was a fairly good Chief Justice, then you must get into the political space to leverage the influence to be appointed Chief Justice. If you want good laws, you must have Boniface Mwangi and the litany of other young activists who can come in and act as a new buffer to the excesses of Parliament. If you want good executive, you must have young people who broaden up and populate the positions of the executive, and able then to infuse these ideas and values within the realm of executive functions. So I think it's a debatable issue, but I personally would encourage some of us to get into this world. And ultimately, I want to concur with my brother, Abaka Zing. It would be tragic to allow Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga to even touch a comma in the Constitution. This Constitution was one of the most progressive constitutions as a result of so much work, and activists shed blood and tears and sweat to get this Constitution. What I hear lately is a few and a couple of other hand-picked leaders sitting somewhere in Safari Park, I'm told, trying to see what does Uhuru Kenyatta want and what does Raila disagree with. This is the greatest insult by these two men to the intellect of the Kenyan people, to the sacrifices of those who came before us. Your fathers founded this nation and founded the ethnicity. They founded the corruption. They founded the bad state that we live in. Please leave us alone. We have a moment right now to transform this country, minus yourselves. The only thing that you will do this country a great favor, I'm sorry to be a bit political, is for Uhuru Kenyatta to exit in October of 2022. He had no internalization of this constitution. It was not that the constitution was a bad constitution, he was a bad leader. Raila Odinga puts me in a dilemma. I have really no idea what these sunset years of his politics are supposed to achieve, what he is intending to achieve with this BBI, apart from a transition to create a momentum to the next election. And I think that is not the work of civil society. Civil society must preserve this constitution. Kenyans of goodwill must preserve this constitution. The least we need, the minimum, is our current constitution and people who can implement it. Again, I want to thank Uraia. I want to particularly thank Father Dole. I've had all this, I'd like to even thank Abubakar, so you come on into this conversation. Try to capacitize all this, like to even thank governance after we have relegated it to the peripherals a lot more seriously, so that we can audit government, we can stop government from its excesses, we can be able to create scorecards, and where possible, use the institution of the judiciary. The judiciary has become our taking government to the peripherals. It has become that pillar that protects our democracy and protects our constitution. And therefore, we must test it more and more. And we must urge Uhuru Kenyatta. It is not his prerogative. He must swear in the 41 judges. And he must leave the judiciary and stop to interfere with the judiciary. I am aware of intentions by BBI to interfere with the Judicial Service Commission so as to interfere with the independence of the judiciary. How can you get a country with a blossoming democracy, with a fairly good economy, and bring it down to its knees? And Kenyans must now raise up to these kinds of transgressions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Hassan. To Samia Omar, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Again, very honored to be with such an esteemed panelist, and many thanks to Father Senator Hassan is still not on mute. I think for me, my parting shot is just to remember, and it might be a little bit repetitive to what the Senator has to say, but that before Chapter 1 of the Constitution is the preamble. And the preamble talks about our role as Kenyans. It doesn't talk about the blaming of the leaders or blaming of the judiciary or our institutions. It's about our individual roles as Kenyans. And so while it talks about a pledge as the people of Kenya, if we actually individualize it to I as Samia Omar, and what are my commitments. And I think I'd love that to be my parting shot. If you give me just 2 minutes, I just want to read it, but kind of change the words a little bit. The preamble goes like, be the people of Kenya, but I'm changing it now. I, Samia Omar, Wana, acknowledge the supremacy of the Almighty God. I honor those who heroically struggle to bring freedom and justice to our land. I am proud of our ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity. I am respectful of the environment, which is our heritage, and determined to sustain it for the benefit of future generations. I am committed to nurturing it and protecting the well-being of individuals, the family, communities, and the nation. I recognize the aspirations of all Kenyans for a government based on the essential values of human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law. I exercise our sovereign and inalienable right to determine the form of government of our country, and having participated fully in the making of this constitution. I adopt and act and give this constitution to ourselves and to our future generation. So I hope that as Kenyans, we first start internally and reflect on what have we done individually in the spirit of this constitution before we actually look at what has our government done or what have our leaders done. And that is hopefully going to be the opportunity for us then to create a change in our country, inshallah.
Thank you, Samia. That's a very good challenge to all of us. Take stock of what we've done to promote constitutionalism. And finally, to Abubakar Zing.
Thank you very much. I would like to end by saying that it's not all gloom. Kenyans heroically struggle to bring justice and freedom to our land. We have done it before. We can still do it again. And this struggle that we are involved in, including this conversation, is a call for all of us to rededicate to our country, to our nation, to our people, and exercise three things. If there is nothing you have done as a Kenyan in terms of reading the Constitution in the last 10 years, or that you have not embraced and internalized the principle of this Constitution, I challenge all of us to recommit ourselves to only The three, which in my opinion are the most fundamental aspects of our constitution, which is Article 1 of our constitution, sovereignty of the people. We, the people, are committed to make sure our country is safe and is protected under this constitution by exercising our sovereignty and rejecting any ideas that will make our country worse off than it is already is. If you study any study that has been done in the last 10 years concerning the direction Kenya is taking, every study I've looked at says that Kenya is going in the wrong direction. So it is up to us to return it in the right direction. Secondly, Article 2 of our constitution, supremacy of the constitution. We should jealously protect the supremacy of the constitution, including the obeying of court orders and making sure that the rule of law and constitutionalism are upheld, which brings me to my third and final principle, which is Article 3 of our constitution, which calls upon us to respect it, to promote it, but even more important, to defend it. And let us rededicate all of us to the idea that we are willing to defend this constitution. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Abubakar. Now I want to give this opportunity to my co-moderator, Linda Riziki, to give her final remarks as well before we hand over to Adika and Father Dolan to close the session. Linda.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Sorry, I have to rush somewhere, an emergency right now. That's why I requested to make my remarks a bit earlier. I can't downplay the benefit of what we've had today. Personally, I think I've learned more about history than all my years of school combined. It has actually opened my eyes, and I believe all the attendees have benefited. The panelists have more than met their mark. I was prepared to be wowed in the morning, but I'm actually bamboozled. That's a word I've been meaning to use for a while. Thank you so much for having me here today, for giving me the opportunity. And I want to, to wish everyone a good day, even as we challenge ourselves to read the Constitution. I commit to read a chapter per day. And this time next year, let's hopefully meet and see where we are as a country and as individuals. Thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon, everyone. I beg to leave.
Thank you very much, Linda. This juncture, I would like to invite Zedekah Adika to make his closing remarks, and then Father Dolan will give a vote of thanks.
I want to appreciate all the panelists and participants that participated in this discussion. Before I complete my closing remark, there was a question that was directed on how civil society is organizing going forward. One, I say that the idea that civil society is a few of us must stop. We must get people on board to speak to issues that relate to governance, relate to human rights, and relate to our general well-being as a nation. So that is what we are trying to inculcate into people in the coastal area so that we work together and hold those in positions accountable. Finally, I want to say in very simple terms that what we have discussed is best, but living it is better. So going forward, let us live to the aspirations that we want and the aspirations that the Constitution put upon us. Thank you.
Thank you, Adika. And finally to Father Gabriel.
Yes, welcome back. Thank you, everybody, once more. I mean, just in case I forget, I want to appreciate the role that Abubakar Said has played in this with the support from Uraia. And we're pleased, you know, that more than 100 people some people couldn't get registered because the number had gone beyond 100. We're aware of that. So it shows you how popular this topic is with the local focus. And we appreciate that we expect that it was live on Facebook and that we will have a link to that so that we can share that what happened today would reach a whole lot of other people, because the content of today was just terrific. It was so excellent. I feel so energized, so inspired by all of the speakers. It was just, everybody was just terrific. And I think the one thing that happened for me today was that I think it reminded us that it's 10 years and there's a lot to celebrate, but there's a lot to regret. And it's like, it's a chance. The 10 years is an opportunity to remember, but to recover, to reclaim the Constitution and say, this is what generations worked to get and to be the Constitution of Kenya. And we cannot let it be trampled on a daily basis. So when we remember 10 years, it's remembering we have a role to play. We have a very important role to play. And what is happening is very much fraudulent insofar as what BBI is attempting to do with it, and it must be resisted. I think there's a great need to get people back organized beyond civil society organizations to reclaim the Constitution that is theirs, and to reach out to larger numbers. Tomorrow at Haki Yetu, we'll have another event, which is not a demonstration, but it's a roadside event, as we did before, as a picture display and an engagement with the public. And we'll do it at Star of the Sea on the roadside, as we did before, and as we did with Kwacha in Kangaleni the other day, engaging the public and talking to them about it, giving them information, answering questions, and reminding people this is for you, and it's time to resist all the negative changes that have happened and the resistance from the establishment. And I think we will continue to engage the issue of which Haki Yetu and Katiba have engaged, the issue of housing in Mombasa and the neglect of the poor is still very much to the front. We will engage that. The housing program that we resisted through the courts is being forced upon us by the political elite, and the contracts have been given to another group of politicians, which means is that as the senator said, it's not the role of politicians to do development or to get contracts for their friends or to buy each other. It's a contract between them and to serve the poor. And that whole social justice agenda of the poor, the right to housing, the right to ownership of land that they share, that we have 60% of people in Mombasa and many rural areas that are still living in endemic poverty and that are still neglected. But this was inspiring. It reminds us we have wonderful people, and our panelists are those who are thinking, who care, and we're not alone. And it may be in the time of Corona that we're thinking of perhaps in isolation and have been silenced. But this medium can reach a whole lot more people that we might have otherwise. So thanks again to Uraia. Thanks. We really appreciate everybody who came and listened and all who signed up. And we hope you've been inspired and energized. Thank you. And God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Dolan. I have nothing more to add. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Thank you.
See you soon.